In section 8.2, we begin to look at the first two. So the first one's called SSS, and then the second one is called SAS. There are going to be 5 total, but these are the first two congruence theorems that let us prove that triangles are congruent without necessarily having all of the information about the triangles being known to start. So if you look down here, side congruence postulate says that if you know that 3 sides of one triangle, 1, 2, 3, are congruent to 3 sides of the other triangle, then you know that the triangles are congruent even though you don't know anything about the angles. Okay. The second one, so again, this is number 1, and then this one's number 2. It says if you know that 2 sides, 1, 2, and the included angle, included just means that it's in between the 2 sides that you know. So if 2 sides and the angle that's in between them are congruent to 2 sides and the angle that's in between them on the second triangle, then that means the 2 triangles are congruent. Even though you don't know the other 3 things about the triangles are congruent, you can conclude that they are congruent to each other. So in example number 1, we're going to look at the pictures, and then we'll use the pictures to decide if the triangles are congruent. If they are, tell which congruence postulate you used. If you cannot tell whether they're the same, say why. Okay. So on the first one, you've got one side the same. Notice that it's not the same position, but that's okay. So this side matches up, this side matches up, and this side matches up. So yes, you can tell that the 2 triangles are congruent to each other, and the reason is the side congruence postulate, which says that if you know that 3 sides are the same as 3 sides, that means that the triangles are equal to each other. I can also make the statement for these triangles. So if I did AEC for the first triangle, I have to be careful because for the second one I have to put the letters in the right order. AEC, so for this triangle, it goes through the one with 2, through the one with 3, so I'll have to follow the same order. So this one will be B, D, F. AEC and BDF. In this triangle, you know that this side's the same as this side, you know that this side's the same as this side, and you know that the angle in between the 2 sides that you know is the same as the angle that's in between the 2 sides that you know. So for this one, we can conclude, yes, the 2 triangles are congruent, and the reason is side, angle, side. Triangle MLN is congruent to triangle ONP. And the reason is side, angle, side. In the last picture, the 2 triangles share this side that's in between them. So you want to make sure that you add this marking onto the picture. It's the reflexive property that lets you put that marking on the picture. And then we want to look at the information that we have. We know that this side's the same as this side. We know that this side's the same as itself. But notice how the angle that you know that's the same is not the angle that's in between the 2 sides that you already know are the same. It would have to be this angle that we know is the same as this angle in order for us to be able to say that the 2 triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. So for this one, you can't tell if they're congruent or not. And then the reason, there's not enough space to write it here, you can say not enough info, or you could get into further detail and you could say that it's not the included angle that you know is congruent, and because of that you can't tell if the 2 triangles are congruent to each other. There's not enough information. The rest of this page of notes is having us practice very similarly to what we did on the front side. So you're looking at pictures, you're going to be adding in either vertical angles or the reflexive property depending on the question, and then you're going to complete the congruence statement or say there's not enough info. So let's look at this first one together. This side's the same as this side's the same as this side. Notice that the reflexive property is what lets you prove that the side that's shared is the same in both triangles. So I can conclude by side that triangle HIJ is congruent to triangle HKJ. Remember, the order of these 3 letters matters, and the reason that I give is the side, because I know that these 3 sides of this triangle are congruent to these 3 sides of this triangle. In the second picture, there's information marked for you, but notice that vertical angles is missing. These 2 angles here in the middle can be marked congruent because they are vertical angles, and vertical angles are always congruent to one another, even when the marking isn't already there for you to start. And because those are the same, I can say that triangle ABC ABC, is congruent to triangle EDC. Remember, the order of the second triangle matters. And the reason is side angle side, because I know these two sides are the same, I know these two sides are the same, and I know that the angle in between them is also the same, so side angle side. In the last picture, there's no vertical angles, but because of the reflexive property, remember reflexive property is always when there's a shared side. Because of the reflexive property, you know that that side's congruent to itself. But be careful when you attempt this part. This side's the same as this side is the same as itself. But in order to use side angle side, it has to be the angle that's in between the two sides that you know is the same. And you see how on this one, it would have to be this angle and this angle that you knew were the same in order to conclude that the triangles are congruent. So if you want to, you can just scribble this out, the whole thing if you want to, and you can say not enough info to prove whether the triangles are congruent or not. And question number 3 has us practicing very similarly. On this one, we have to put all the markings on the picture ourselves, though. So we're told that AB is the same as CB, so we can add these markings onto the picture. We're told that D is the midpoint of AC, so midpoint means it's in the middle, so that means this piece is the same as this piece. Because of the reflexive property, we can mark that the piece in the middle is congruent to itself, and then we can stop because we have enough information to prove that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD, and the reason is side, 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 because we know these three sides of this first triangle are congruent to these three sides of the second triangle. And so moving on, we're just going to keep up with that pattern. AB is congruent to AD. It says side AC bisects angle BCD. That means that this piece of the angle is congruent to this piece of the angle, because remember, bisect just means it cuts it in half. And then, because of the reflexive property, we can mark the picture here and say that that side is congruent to itself. And so we have enough, let's see, we do not have enough information to conclude on this one. We know this side's the same as this side, we know this side's the same as itself, but it's the wrong angle. We would have to know that this piece of the angle was equal to this piece of the angle in order for it to be side angle side. So for this one, you can scribble it out, and underneath it you can write not enough info. It has to be the included angle. On C rather, side AC bisects angle DAB, so that means this piece is congruent to this piece. It says side AD is congruent to side AB, and so those are the two things that are given to us. Side AC is congruent to itself, and that's because of the reflexive property, not because it was given to us. And because of that, we do have enough information on this one to conclude that the triangles are congruent. Just be careful of the order. So triangle ACD is congruent to triangle ACB, and the reason is side angle side. We know these two sides are the same, we know these two angles are the same, and we know that this side is the same as itself. So side angle side, side angle side. Sometimes the information that's given to you seems like one thing, but it's really more than one thing. So be careful on D. It says G is the midpoint of RT, so that means that this piece is the same as this piece, but then it also says that G is also the midpoint of HI, which would mean that this piece was the same as this piece. These two triangles intersect at a point, they make an X with each other, and so that means that because of vertical angles, I can show that those two angles are congruent to each other, and that means I do have enough information to prove that the two triangles are congruent. So triangle RGI would be congruent to triangle TGH, and the reason would be side angle side, 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 and then the angle in between, so SAS, SAS. And then finally, this one's tricky, ABC. I always like to check which triangle is given to me here. So I'm not trying to prove that the little triangles are equal to each other. I'm trying to prove that this big overlapping triangle is congruent to this bigger overlapping triangle. AB is congruent to CD. And then it says that angle ABC, so this whole angle right here, is congruent to angle BCD, so this whole angle right here. So that's good. And then these two triangles that I'm trying to prove are congruent to each other share this side right here. So because of the reflexive property, I can say that these triangles that share that shared side is congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. And so it's kind of hard to see, but again, trace the triangles that you're trying to prove are congruent. I can say that triangle ABC, so this big one over here, is congruent to triangle DCB, and the reason for that one is going to be side angle side, because I know that these sides are the same. I know that this side is the same on both triangles, and then I also know that the angle that's in between those two sides are congruent on each of the triangles as well, so it's by side angle side. So looking back at all of, well, I guess everything on this whole page, one of the things that I want to make sure to stress to you is the importance of marking the given information onto the picture, because when you write the givens down on the picture, that's what helps you decide what your reason is. Today we only have 2 reasons. It's either SSS or SAS, but as we add to that list of reasons, marking the diagram is going to be really important.